This is Chip Maxwell, and you're listening to the Retire Smart podcast with David Brooks. We kick off today's episode by celebrating Chip Maxwell's 5-year anniversary at Retire Smart, reflecting on the firm's growth from humble beginnings to a thriving 40-plus person team. The conversation then shifts to current market dynamics and what they could mean for investors heading into the second half of the year. Tune in for a mix of reflection, strategy, and forward-looking insights. David, we'll get to the news as always, but first here, I'm going to invoke a point of personal privilege and just note that June 8th marks my 5th anniversary at Retire Smart.
All right, 5 years, and sadly, I think it was just last month we took away the 6-month sabbatical benefit at the 5-year mark.
No.
Man, sorry about that. But anyway, congratulations. No, that's pretty awesome because when you joined, when we first met,
quite a ride.
Yeah, you were doing a radio show that I started sponsoring, and the signal was just strong enough so if I drove to the parking lot, I could actually hear the show outside your building, right?
We've come some distance since then.
Well, and then a few years later, you end up joining our team, and I think you were maybe number 12 or something on the team.
I was the 12th employee. We were in a facility. Well, it was your second stop, your first home, which, you called it the dungeon. It was a ground level suite, but it was kind of rough in there. You were in your second stop, 1,900 square feet, 12 employees. I was number 12. I made it a dozen, serving about 200 households. David, now we're north of 40 employees, including a dozen licensed financial advisors in addition to yourself. We're at 19,000 square feet now. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're approaching 1,000 households served.
Yeah, I believe we'll cross that number here this
year.
Before
2025
we may have already crossed it, frankly. I don't even know.
What a journey it's been. You probably remember this when it was just you and Alicia, the first employee you hired, working the front desk. You hearken back to the radio days when you were sponsoring a show that I hosted, and you said, so you'd been on board a few months and Christmas was approaching. You said, I've advertised on other stations before, and I know sometimes a radio station likes to thank its advertisers with a little Christmas gift. If by chance you were thinking of that, don't bring us a box of chocolates or a fruit basket. Bring a space heater. Alicia's freezing to death on that front entryway.
It was pretty dismal,
It was rough.
So the company was started in the basement, in my basement, literally. Then we went and rented that little office. I couldn't operate out of my house, too much distraction. And then, it literally was the dungeon. And, I really need to take some of our employees. We need to take them over there just so they can actually appreciate it. You walk in now, we have a huge kitchen. Snacks are provided. It's a pretty nice work environment. At least I believe it is that we provide.
It is indeed.
Compared to you got to see the humble beginnings, so I think that's great.
Yes, well, and what a ride it's been, and the best is yet to come. All right, here we go into the news. David, you sent me this right before we sat down to do the show. So ADP is an employment analysis firm. It's very
largest payroll provider in America. So their data is pretty robust.
And so people pay attention. Eventually, we'll get the May jobs number, but ADP always issues a kind of a preliminary analysis. Here's the CNBC headline: Private sector hiring rose by just 37,000 in May, the lowest in more than 2 years. That's according to ADP's analysis. Do you see it the same way?
Yeah, that's pretty dismal numbers.
Yeah.
So we are seeing layoffs mount. So Microsoft recently announced 6,000 highly paid folks getting laid off. These keep piling up. So just this week, we saw Atlanta Fed, which is kind of does a forecasting nowcast on GDP, and all the right-wing media outlets jumped on, 3.3% GDP. That's not where GDP is going to come in, but we are going to have a robust number for the second quarter, and that's just due to tariff shifting, right? Inventories, and that's where we had a really negative number in the first quarter. But the economy as a whole is not very, very healthy. Look, we talk about this all the time. I voted for the guy in office now, but we got some troubling times coming ahead, and people need to wake up to the reality and be prepared for what is about to come our way.
So the March and April jobs numbers were pretty good, pretty robust, right? But do you think maybe May we might
So interest rates have not faded as most economists thought they would, and what Wall Street was predicting is lower interest rates. We know that we're financing all this debt, which is going to just keep piling on to the government spending and adding to our deficit. I mean, if interest rates stay where they are, we're looking at over a $3 trillion a year deficit now, Chip. So adding $3 trillion a year to the current. And by the way, this weekend we are going to cross $37 trillion in debt, and we're adding over $1 trillion every 90 days right now. So think about that. $1 trillion every 3 months in additional debt. And some people can't even comprehend that. So, Chip, 32 seconds ago, we were in the middle of last month. Or excuse me, we were 32 seconds ago would have been before Jesus was put on the cross. All right, and that's how long it would take to pay off $1 trillion. If you pay me $1 a second, it would take you 32,800 years.
It just broke my brain with that one.
So it's unconscionable that our government can't get behind actually getting our spending back in line. And we know we're going to spend, right? But typically the government spends, and I know this in the story, about 17.5% of our GDP is what our government usually costs. And we can go back for the last 50 years and see that. Well, we're spending in the 22, 23% range right now. That's massive up spending, and it can't continue or you'll bankrupt the country. And that's why interest rates are higher, and that's what's going to slow down the economy, because now capital expenditures, businesses that want to expand. If I want to borrow money to open a new office location, to buy a building, whatever I want to borrow money for, any business owner is going to have to pay more for that loan, which means less money to the bottom line, which means less hiring, less jobs, less raises, and the economic trickle down will just spell doom and gloom in our economy.
Mr. Doge, Elon Musk, on his way out the door, said, "What is this bill you're proposing on Capitol Hill?" And for all the successes in the first Trump presidency, fiscal reform was not one of them. And so it has some people concerned.
They campaigned on, we're going to get things back in order.
Yes.
And so now American public, left, right, in the middle, like I said, I'm an independent who voted for this president, but they are not bringing, they're not showing up. They're not doing what we think they said to do. And Congress is the problem. Now, Trump is a bit of a problem. He just wants to get the tax cuts through and claim another victory. I get it. Now, the other thing is this big, beautiful bill is a reconciliation bill. So it's not a provision bill where they actually cut things, but there's no mention of it. And they keep complaining they could have trimmed things. They actually add about $4.8 trillion in the next 10 years to our deficit. So they're not helping. And I think Americans of all political views are just fed up. And we're starting to see that on social media. So I would say take note. And that's the other thing. So everybody cheered just a few weeks in the House, passed the bill. The Senate's saying no way, right? So we have at least 4 senators on the Republican side that would be needed to carry this bill over the top, are just not going to move forward. In particular, Rand Paul's an absolute no. Ron Johnson out of Wisconsin is a pretty strong no at this point. So I want them to hold the line. Let's make Congress go back to the drawing board and figure this stuff out.
David, let's go global for a few minutes here. First Europe, then Asia. The headline from CNBC says, Trump-backed nationalist clinches Poland's presidency. You thought this was important enough to bring to our audience. Why?
Well, so Poland has had an amazing economic turnaround, much like Argentina is going through right now. They were a very socialist, communist nation for years.
You've cited Javier Milei several times in Argentina.
Yeah. So Poland has flipped the script into now their GDP per capita is the number 1 in Europe. They're skyrocketing up, and they had a recent kind of setback. And so this was a very close election. They kind of had a socialist versus a capitalist, and the capitalist won. It was a thin margin, but he did in fact win. And that is just showing you that elections in other countries are swinging back to the right in many cases. We had a couple other ones that we went the other way, like Canada here recently. But, it's just telling you, people are like fed up with the government spending money. And the countries that are pushing, Italy, I think you're going to see some nice trajectory. I forget her name right now, so sorry, the Prime Minister of Italy.
Meloni.
Yeah, and now Poland, Argentina. So you're seeing this around the globe. And what this means is you have to actually do what's called austerity. And we need it here. We have to go in and start to codify, if you want to call it that, some of these things that we found in Doge. And that's just tipping the iceberg. So we need to get in there. We need to get our government under control. The only way you grow the economy is through the free market. You cannot do it with the government. The government spending money is shrinking the economy, and unfortunately, we're headed the wrong direction. And that's Republicans and Democrats alike. They're just addicted to spending, and none of them, Chip, want to cut anything that would hurt their district. And I get it, right? So military bases, if we remember the base cuttings from many, many years ago.
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah, we're going to cut bases. Just not mine, not in my state, right?
Yeah.
So we need people to put their big boy pants on and come to the table and vote. So I think the big, beautiful bill, the only way I'd continue to call it that is if we put term limits in it.
Okay. Let's spin the globe and stop at an Asian now. Another CNBC headline: China's May factory activity unexpectedly shrinks as tariffs dent sentiment. Worst drop since 2022. Well, that word unexpectedly, I guess only if you haven't been listening to this radio show for the last few weeks, because you have been saying all along, China needs us more than we need China.
Yeah, 2 months ago, they had over 1,800 factories close in 1 month. 1,800 factories employing hundreds of thousands of people. And there was social unrest there, so that's why they flew to Geneva and sort of shook hands with J.D. Vance and our team, if you will, saying they would get the framework. Well, both sides now have accused the other side of not agreeing to the framework that's laid out, so we're back to the drawing board. And so tariffs, and Trump just doubled the tariffs on steel starting June 1st. And made a deal with where Japan's Nippon Steel is going to acquire our U.S. steel here, but that had a guarantee of at least 70,000 U.S. jobs created. So anyway, you're seeing some of the mixes come together. India is pretty close to a deal, but no trade deals have really gotten over the finish line, fully details out. And so I think that's cautionary tale of if China's not producing goods, which, let's face it, that's where we buy toys and cheap textile goods. And I don't really think those jobs are coming back to America, but I think there's certain jobs we need to, reshore here, et cetera. So this is just a cautionary tale that we're a long, long way from home fixing these things. And that could spell doom and gloom for our economy in the near term. But we'll wait and see. And again, the job numbers prove it. So if the Federal Reserve happens to be listening to this show, you got 2.1% inflation this month and you have dismal job numbers. What are your mandates again? Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you for listening to the Retire Smart podcast with David Brooks. If you want to learn how to generate lifetime income, reduce your tax bill, and maintain your lifestyle in retirement, visit retiresmartpodcast.com. And make sure to subscribe to keep up with new episodes every week.